Okay. Well, we'll just trust the little clock on my thing and we'll say we're live right here from Burley Corners in Penfield Township. This is Mac McCullough from Willard Library with another installment of Stories at Sundown. My guest this evening is Ron Adams. Hi, Ron.
Hello.
Ron is met Ron, I don't know, 6, 8 years ago. Was an IT consultant. Did I get that right? He's a speaker and he's an author, and he has a new book that we're here to talk about today, The Inner Path. Welcome to the program, Ron.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you. I read this book, and you can tell that it made an impact on me. I had a lot of little bookmarks in it, and so we're just going to talk a little bit about it. And uh, why don't we start with the book, and then we might get into a little bit of more your background. But why a path, Ron? Why a path?
It's become clear in the last few years when I've been talking to friends and neighbors and I hear things on television that our culture is having trouble having conversations across the many barriers that separate. Those barriers are in politics, religion, or in any number of things. And so really began to look at this. People are questioning, how do I handle Thanksgiving dinner? When Uncle Joe has an opinion that I don't agree with, and he's kind of obnoxious, and how do I handle that? And it seems like our culture is only giving us two options right now.
Yeah.
One, to be silent and don't say anything, and the other one is to be argumentative and angry. And we've seen that those kinds of approaches can erupt into violence. And there's violence sometimes on the left, and there's violence sometimes on the right. And there has to be a third way. And so as I looked at from my reading I was doing, I came across a variety of sources. And it came to me that there is a 7-step path to help us with this cultural problem that we have here in America, and that is the inner path.
Yeah, and that was sort of my next question. It's 7 steps. How did you arrive at those?
So they're a combination of some ancient wisdom advice, and a lot of times the ancient wisdom advice came through religious people from either Christianity or Buddhism or Islam or any number of religious perspectives, and they're basic wisdom. So what I did was I also took the modern well-being guru's wisdom, put some of these concepts together, and they seem to flow in a pretty coherent way, a logical path that we could follow that would give us calmness, compassion, and good conversation if we follow this.
Yeah, yeah. The yeah, and you lay it right out in your book. In a chapter format. Step 1, focus. Step 2, relax. Step 3, study. Step 4, reflect. Step 5, discard. Step 6, give. Step 7, act. Pretty straightforward.
Those are what I did. If I took an ancient wisdom from a religious tradition, wanted to strip away the religious part, word that would appeal to those who are religious, those who are non-religious, those who are conservative, and those who are liberal.
Yeah.
And so that's why I use words focus instead of maybe meditation, maybe prayer. But then I explain it in a deeper way within the text.
Right. So talk a little bit about. I mean, I mentioned that you're a minister, and you talk about this in the book. You grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household. Is that fair?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different terms having was more of a fundamentalist background.
Okay, Ron, you did break up a little bit, so I want to maybe inch towards the microphone. Maybe it's the microphone. I don't know, but go ahead and repeat that. You told me to make you repeat it, so I'm doing that.
So there's fine distinctions between fundamentalism and evangelicalism, and then
Yeah.
moving more toward mainline. I was more of an evangelical, but with certain within that movement, there's a certain number of fundamentalists also. But it was a very good family I grew up in, very loving
Yeah.
dad, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you speak very lovingly of your father, who was a pastor himself in the book. But I'm curious about where, I mean, how that grounded you and where you are now in pursuing a path like this.
So there was something about my background that there are four boys in my family, and I was the one that was kind of drawn toward the spiritual dimensions of life. And I was never kind of satisfied with what I found at each stage. So I kept evolving and learning as, that's pretty natural for most people and whatever they endeavor. We're all evolving. And
Yeah.
so I've gone on this continuum all the way from evangelicalism uh, to liberalism to what I call post progressivism, which is kind of a phrase that I try to explain in part of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the concepts that, I mean, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. You and I think you went with Melinda to Vietnam,
Yes.
right? And in Ho Chi Minh City, um, you got advice on how to cross the street. So
Yeah.
why don't you talk about that, because I just think that's fascinating.
So Melinda's nephew grew up in Kenya. And he's of Indian descent. And so there's a lot of different languages there, and he's a pilot in Vietnam, big airplane. And out of his background in Kenya, there's a what they call a a Swahili word that means go slowly, and it's pole pole.
Pole pole.
And so when Vietnam has 43 million scooters, and it seemed like many, many million of those were right in Ho Chi Minh City. They were all around us. We even got stuck in a traffic jam once in which the motorcycle or the scooters just kept filling every nook and cranny, and it was just a gridlock. And so if you're going to cross a street, the advice was pole pole. Just step out into traffic slowly. Don't dart out there, or you'll get hit. But if you step out slowly, they'll go around you. And that's what the advice was.
And I assume it worked. You're still here. You're in one piece.
No, I wouldn't want to do that on a major, four lane highway type situation. But in a busy neighborhood, you could do that because there weren't a lot of stoplights in just neighborhoods. And yeah, so slowly was an illustration of that. Meditation, the first four chapters of this book are really an expansion of meditation. And so a lot of people say I did it, but it really doesn't have much impact on life. So what I try to do is tease apart meditation in a modern secular sense and try to make it easy, not difficult. And
Yeah.
so part of it is just slowing down, pole pole.
Yeah. That's hard to do.
It is. Our
It,
our are teaching us to speed up and relax. Slow is teaching us to slow down. And the great of spirituality down through the centuries have always it's not speeding up to help you accomplish things in life. It's being more reflective and being more at peace with yourself, flowing non-reactive stillness is a great.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and you get to this later in the book about how these concepts apply not just individually but culturally as well. Uh, and I just remember thinking that try that here. Try pole pole here. You're liable to get hit. I think.
That's
Right.
right. And pole pole is not meant to be taken literally with traffic in the United States.
Right. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the concept. I mean, obviously that's. So I think about my own hometown, which is I think probably less like this than it used to be, but it once was that if you stepped to the street, traffic stopped, at least the main street.
Hmm. Right.
I mean, it was sort of like an unwritten rule. It was a norm, and
Sure.
I think that's what you were referring to. At least that's what how I took it.
Yeah. Ann Arbor actually has a ordinance that must,
Yeah,
again, I'm not talking about
yeah, yeah. Um, but so, and I don't. This doesn't have to be Q&A. You can elucidate on anything you want. But I mean, I had a ton of questions, and
let me just
yeah,
give
go
you
ahead.
three sentences that really form the core of my thinking here. One is by a guy named Arthur Brooks, and he wrote a book called Love Your Enemies, in which he says, it is not less disagreement we need, but it's better
Better
disagreement.
disagreement. Yeah,
Silence doesn't work, anger doesn't work, but better, authentic agreement is what we need. The second one is by a philosopher named Steve McIntosh that I've become very good friends with. And he's what they call an integral philosopher, lives in Boulder, Colorado. And he says the only way we can find our way out of this cultural war that we're in between liberals and conservatives, believers or non believers, is if each of us individually becomes better versions of ourselves. So instead of looking to Washington for the answers or some other leader or even our religious leaders, we each need to take responsibility for ourselves to figure out how we can become a better version of ourselves. And inner path hopefully helps us do that. And the third sentence comes from the ancient philosopher Socrates, 500 years before Christ. And he was in Greece and Athens, and Socrates was just a wonderful figure. And some of Christianity even comes from thoughts that come out of his and his students' writings. And he says, the beginning of wisdom is when we get to the place that we don't know and we recognize how little we know.
yeah,
That's the beginning of wisdom. And the
yeah,
way that applies in America today is that if we think we have all the answers, whether we're liberal or conservative, doesn't matter. Our hubris gets in the way, and we're not open to even considering an opposing viewpoint because we already know the answer. So we need to hearken back to Socrates because he's absolutely right. The beginning of wisdom is when I recognize I don't have all the answers. And so maybe I want to listen to you.
yeah, yeah. Actually, when I read that in your book, it to me it speaks to curiosity.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, you have a wonderful example of that where at a I think a family gathering or a wedding perhaps that you engaged with somebody known to have different political views. And it's really and talk about that. I mean, it really struck me that you were being genuinely curious about who he was.
Yeah, that's right. He was a young man that I just suspected with very little conversation that he was from a different spectrum of understanding that was a different perspective. And so the way I began it was to employ this little tool that I've endorsed, and that is I made some sort of statement where I was kind of critical of those within my own camp. And as I authentically tried to talk with him, and engage in conversation, he detected that I wasn't defensive about my position. I was curious about his position. And so by the end of the conversation, he was much more willing to even mention some of the weaknesses of his position. Well,
Yeah,
then we had a real authentic conversation.
yeah. And curiosity is just such a healthy place to go through life. I mean, to be curious about what's around you, the people around you. Um, and to me, that is the essence of what I would consider a spiritual path.
That's right. That's right. Um, yeah, I've got this little bookmark I made when I was just developing, not even this book exactly, but it led to this book. And one of the definitions of spirituality that I kind of came up with is it is the movement toward truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah.
And the reason that is so apropos is that it applies whether you're a liberal, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a Christian, an agnostic, it applies to you. And uh, it helps you go deeper, helps you enter your pathway to improve and become a better version of yourself.
Yeah, actually I wrote that down on this little slip of paper. Your definition of spirituality. Um, and we're living in a time where a lot of people identify themselves as not religious but spiritual. Um, you think that's a healthy thing?
Well, what you find is that I've always been a person who enjoyed church experiences, but a lot of ministers have disparaged that term, spiritual but not religious.
Yeah,
I think it is an absolutely honest term. So this book is actually its target audience is that group of people. Uh, in fact, I would say the more religious you are, the more you may not understand everything. Uh, it's the people that have become exiles to religion that we need to speak to also, and we need to embrace their spirituality.
yeah, yeah. And talking about curiosity, um, so much of it. I mean, we're talking a lot of times. You think about curiosity about others, but curiosity about yourself.
Mhm.
I mean, why do I think the way I think? Where did I come from? Um, that seems to be a place to start if you're especially if you're feeling a little lost.
Absolutely. I would encourage people to never be afraid of exploring your own inner workings, even with counseling. I've had some good experience through different traumatic events in my life.
Yeah,
It's all good. But I want to say something about our leaders. Um, we get some wonderful things from our involvement in different organizations, whether or whether
I'm going to stop you just for a second. Lean forward because we lost a little audio there. So
okay.
go ahead again.
So in a lot of the organizations we're part of, we get a lot of comfort from in a religious organizations, the songs and the hymns and the
Yeah,
words. We get a lot of camaraderie from our friends, and we get a lot of certainty from our beliefs. But what I'm observing is that neither the conservative churches nor the liberal churches are really giving us tools to help us with these cultural issues. Um, and I think the inner path is something that could help us get above our get above our belief systems, go beyond that, actually improve so that we can have these better.
yeah. So I mean, we already talked about the 7 steps, which sounds pretty sequential and linear, but it's not easy to get started. I mean, how I mean, I consider myself a fairly spiritual person and someone who tries to be curious and seek the truth, but I also have the monkey brain. I have a really hard time slowing down. Um, I mean, how do you, and meditation and me, I don't know. I just don't do it. I don't do it right, Ron.
Yeah,
I,
well,
I mean, how do you get going on that stuff?
so nobody does it right. There is no one set way. And whether it's, and that was one of the reasons why I teased out the whole concept of meditation to include not just the meditation, but kind of the mindfulness, the whole day of slowing yourself, relaxing, the whole concept of even studying and reading good books and listening to good podcasts. That can all be part of the meditative, mindful experience. But you can start with 1 minute or 5 minutes, 3 times a week, or once a week, or start wherever you're at. And over time, guy named Stephen Batchelor that I love his writings says over time, if you consistently work at this, you should see an increase in non-stillness. In other words, when you're surprised by it. Now, I wrote this book for myself, by the way. I don't live up to every standard that I put in this book, so I need this kind of advice. But he says over time, good when surprised by a lot of different situations. You should be able to be these in the moment,
Yeah,
be more reflective.
yeah. You spend some time on breathing as well in the book, and I do try to do that, and it does. It's amazing how much it does help. Um, and why is that?
Well, I knew a little bit about it, but there's actually a recent book out last year called Breath that I don't even include in the book because I just found out about
Yeah,
it. It's fabulous about the science behind breathing, and it all works together in terms of your meditative and contemplative approach. And, there again, the Western mind kind of lost that information over the decades because we've been pushing so hard to rush our breathing. Because,
yeah, yeah. And so learning how to breathe, it sounds. Of course, we breathe all the time, but that idea of really breathing slowly, and you can demonstrate if you want. I mean, it's
right,
no, but seriously, it's a contemplative process, and just being conscious of it. I
James,
think that to me is the key, is being conscious of it.
yeah. And James Nestor says practicing a 5.5 second inhalation and then a 5.5 second exhalation, practicing even a few minutes a day will actually have great healthy benefit to you.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the ancients knew that, but the modern American and European civilizations in recent centuries have forgotten.
right. So there's so much that we could go over on this book, and some of it is really challenging. I mean, and so you talk about, it's later in the book, discarding. You know, um, just talk about that concept a little bit, and what's behind that.
So the whole idea of a shadow of our personality within our personality, and that is the part of our personality we keep from those around us, but it's actually part of who we are based on early experiences, early trauma. Um, those come back to bite us if we don't deal with them. It doesn't mean to reject them, but it means to recognize them, improve in the way that we react to them. Um, that is really information that is only about 100 years old.
Yeah,
As with the advent of psychology, uh, the kind of the more modern approaches to psychotherapy and just good counseling. So religion again doesn't answer that question because religion is much older than modern psychology. And so it's good to embrace that idea that oftentimes we bring this shadow into our interactions with people. And if we can deal with it, it'll help us become more authentic and contented and happy people.
yeah,
There's one other point I'd like to talk.
sure,
I mentioned in the book that we all have virtues and we all have pathology.
yeah,
That includes our own worldview. So conservatives have virtues and they have pathology. So do liberals. So do religious. So do non-religious. So do atheists. So do agnostics. Um, we oftentimes, when we're talking to somebody, all we see is their pathology. It's real easy to pick up the flaws of the other,
yeah,
but we want them to see our virtue. What the well-being gurus say, people, is if we learn to virtue and convert it, we'll be well on our way to improving how we converse with one another.
Yeah, yeah. I was just also thinking about the that dark shadow or the shadow. Um, a lot of it is because our brains are amazing. I mean, they really are. We're consciously aware of so little of the information that we're taking in, and I think the same thing goes for what we're putting out. Um, we're on autopilot so much of the time, and that's really what when I think of meditation, that's really what it's about: is getting off of autopilot and being more reflective.
Being more reflective, and as they say, being in the here and now. And,
Yeah,
you know, my history is Christianity, from wide spectrum of Christianity all the way from conservative to liberal. Uh, but Buddhism has much to tell us that, that we can learn from.
yeah,
And one of them is that if we anticipate the future, that is suffering. Or if we regret the past, that is suffering. So
yeah,
stay in the here and now, you can reduce the level of suffering.
yeah. You quote some. I think, yeah, I couldn't be a Buddhist or I couldn't be a Christian if there weren't for Buddhism. Who said that?
So the guy named Paul Knitter, he's a
Yeah,
Catholic scholar, and says without Buddha,
yeah,
it's a wonderful book where he kind of goes through the whole Christian belief system and then compares it to the Buddhist belief systems on different things. And what most people don't realize, I view, and many people don't view Buddhism as religion. It's and so therefore Buddhism, certain principles of Buddhism can be added to any philosophy, any religion experience, whether liberal or conservative. And there's no competition. There's no, nothing that tears down your religion. And so I think one of the reasons why meditation is much world,
I missed that last part.
well, meditation is so much more accepted now, even in religious circles. And
Yeah,
yoga, a lot of churches have yoga classes. You know,
yeah,
so
yeah. You cite a lot of great. A lot of things should be on my reading list that you cited in your book, and but you also cited some old texts, and uh, from people who are following Jesus.
mhm.
Three, I believe, and you'll probably remember them before you remember them better than I do. And I'm curious about the idea of what does following Jesus mean as someone who has come from a Christian background, evangelical, then moved toward Unitarianism. But so much of what you wrote seems to be still grounded in some of those core teachings.
Yeah, so everybody has the way they were raised, and that's always a core part of who you are, even if you evolve past some of the practices of the way you were raised. And so one of the integral things is that you always appreciate where you came from. You don't disparage it, and I don't disparage my background in this book at all.
No, no, you don't.
But I have definitely moved beyond it in my experience, and so I think that's important. Now, the reason you quote from a lot of religious things when you're talking about ancient wisdom literature is that much of the ancient wisdom literature was couched in religious language because many years ago you weren't allowed to be anything but religious, under the threat of death in many areas of the world. So, I mean, in old Germany around the Reformation, you either had to be live in a Catholic area and be Catholic, or you lived in a Protestant area and you had to be Protestant, or you were cast in jail or beheaded.
Yeah, we don't want to bring that back.
No, we don't want to do that.
But there's also a part of me that thinks that sometimes people really are attracted to having things spelled out for them.
Sure. And The inner path perfectly fine for those who like the certainty of their belief system.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't want to evolve in their core belief system, but they can still evolve in their conversation with other people that are different. They can still work on their shadow side that they bring into their, belief system. So, the inner path is really for everybody.
Yeah. I recognize so much in this book that is used more and more in mental health circles, in helping children and families who have been victimized by trauma or have endured trauma or working through trauma. Um, you see breathing and meditation being used in schools, which you didn't see, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Um, so in a lot of ways, this is book is as much, you could call it a healing book as much as anything else. You don't necessarily have to be conscious of a spiritual path,
Right.
but all these things might get you there.
Yeah,
One
some
way.
like the word spiritual if they're pure secular scientists. A lot of times they struggle with that word, but it's a word that there's not really a good substitute for. So
Yeah,
you hear it referred to all the time by people of all perspectives. But I wanted to say one more thing too about our culture. We, on the liberal side of things, as well as on the conservative side of things, our culture wants to put us in different silos of understanding.
yeah,
The way out of this cultural problem that we have is to have conversations across silos of understanding. So the liberals need to talk to the conservatives. The conservatives need to talk to the liberals. The straights need to talk to the gays. The gays need to talk to, whatever. The Christians need to talk to the Buddhist and Islam, and every mix that you can think.
well, and to that end, the so-called moderate liberals need to talk to the so-called progressive liberals, and on and on. It just seems to become more and more fractious. And so even when you feel like you have an alignment within a certain ideology, you're being litmus test about whether you live up to that ideology all the time, and that drives people apart.
That's right, and you have to make it known that your conversation is not trying to convince anybody.
Yeah,
You're just being curious.
yeah, yeah. It's good advice. I try to follow that myself. I've really tried to get out of the business of telling people what they should think,
Absolutely.
or necessarily telling them what I think, unless it's invited.
Yeah,
Um,
you do a good job
hard.
at.
It's hard sometimes, though. I mean, it's easy because we all want to shout our truths, right?
And your truth can be shouted in a certain situation. That is, if you have a relationship built up, a relationship of trust, then hopefully you're able to share a little deeper level, and you're not going to drive each other apart because you trust each other.
That's great. Well, Ron, I really enjoyed this book. It is at Willard Library, but I bought mine, Ron. So,
Give
but
me, a review on,
what's that?
give me a review on Amazon.
Okay, yeah, I will do that. I will do that. So yeah, The Inner Path by Ron Adams. Oh, I guess one other question. And you talk about all the alternatives and options and ideas that people who are curious about doing this, where they might begin. But are there specific areas that you might recommend, even in the community, that if people just want to learn more, they'd be welcome to come learn more?
Well, anybody can always email me. Happy to engage. We can take the conversation, wherever.
And what's your email address?
It is called H as in Harry, O as in Oboe, B as in Boy, 641 at gmail.com.
Let's see. Where's my @ sign?
So Hob641 at gmail.com.
And there it is.
There it is. Yeah. And the reason it's Hob is that my father was a minister in a little town in northern Iowa where I was born, Britt, Iowa, and it's the hobo capital of the world.
Great story. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ron, and thank you to the viewers who joined us today. We'll be back next week. I'm interviewing Kim Langridge, who is the co-president of BC Pride, who just finished up another Pride Month in Battle Creek, or Pride Week in Battle Creek. She has an amazing story, and so we'll be chatting with her. Um, Look forward to it, and everybody have a great week. Take care.
Thank you.